I will tell you honestly, at 14, 15, probably not that much. I just had a coach that this young girl, again, an FSU student, that really believed in me. And she just kept saying, I've seen everybody in the nation because I'm up north where we hold all the meets, and you could really be good. And I had won the Florida AAU, which probably wasn't much of anything, and went to the Nationals and did really great. I think I won. I don't even remember the Nationals. And she was like, again, that's not a super elite level, but she believed in me. She knew of this coach, Dick Mulvihill, and Linda Matheny, a 3-time Olympian that was his wife. And she said, you can do this. And my parents were like, do you want to pursue this? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And I'd seen Olga Korbut in 1972, and that was really the first real gymnastics I had ever seen in my whole life. And I would just do handstands every day, all that day long, and cartwheels. And my mom said I never sat down and ate. And so I knew I loved it. And I thought, all these people kind of believe I can do this. Why not? It's a great adventure. I'm going to try this. Let's go.
From Fiore Communications, it's How I Got Here, a show of inspiring stories from Tallahassee area leaders, business owners, and neighbors, all the challenges, opportunities, inspirations, the twists and turns of life that led them to where they are today. Everyone has a story worth telling, and I am really grateful that we get to bring a few of them to you. I truly have been changed by my conversations with these amazing people, and I'm confident you will be too. I'm Dave Fiore, and in this episode, I speak with Carrie Zimmerman, co-founder and former CEO of the Zimmerman Agency. Carrie is a native Tallahassean whose family has been in the capital city for more than 100 years. She grew up in a competitive, sports-oriented environment, but it was rolling on the mats of the Tallahassee Tumbling Tots that sparked a passion that would lead to exploring gymnastics, training full-time in Oregon at age 15, and earning a coveted spot on the 1976 U.S. Olympic team, a memory that still elicits great emotion. After graduating from the University of Georgia, Carrie worked with her husband Curtis at an ad agency in Atlanta before moving to Tallahassee to be near her family. Starting with no clients but a considerable Rolodex, the couple started the Zimmerman Agency, which today has more than 130 employees and competes with New York agencies and often wins for the right to represent some of the most prestigious brands in the world. Recently retired, Carrie now focuses on travel, FSU sports, and enjoying being a grandmother. We started our conversation talking about how she would describe herself today.
Well, if it was in a personal scenario, the first thing I'd want to tell them is where I'm from. I know that sounds crazy, but I think that truly defines a lot of who I am. I'm not out in New York. I'm not out of LA. I mean, the people we compete against in business all the time. So I'm so used to that filtering into who I am. And I say we're in the real part of Florida,
Right.
where people were actually born here and didn't move from someplace else. And then I always say we're about 20 miles from Georgia, so we might as well be South Georgia. And I think that says a lot, that I'm a lot about family, that I love to travel the world, and that I kind of love everything. I'm very passionate about everything. There's not a lot of stuff that I don't care about, because if other people care about it, I kind of want to know more about whatever that is.
Yeah. All right. You grew up right here in Tallahassee.
Yes.
And you have quite a family legacy of public service in your family. So talk about that a little bit. What does that mean to you? And kind of give us just an overview of your family presence here in this area.
Absolutely. We are almost at our 100-year mark of being in Tallahassee, Florida, which is awesome.
Wow. Yeah.
My mom can't remember the exact date, but it was like mid-20s because she's about to turn 100 in
Wow.
about a few months. She still lives on the street I grew up on in the house by herself. South Ride. It's amazing. It's a miracle. But my grandfather, she's from Tennessee, and they just decided they wanted a better life out of Tennessee. They kind of lived rurally, and he worked for an insurance company, and they decided Tallahassee is where they wanted him. And before you knew it, by the mid-50s, he was the mayor of Tallahassee. He's the one that inked the deal to build the hospital. He's the one that inked the deal to build the airport.
And what was his name?
HC Summit, but he went by Cliff Summit.
Okay.
And it was awesome when we as grown-ups, moved back to Tallahassee because everybody was like, I used to fish with your granddaddy. I used to hunt with your granddaddy. There's something to that makes it wonderful. So my mom obviously grew up here. She was a cheerleader at Leon. We have decades of Leon students in our family. My brother, Roger, and Mitch, and my sister, little Alice, as everybody calls her because my mom's Alice. We all went to Leon High School. My dad actually coached football at Leon High School in the 50s, and it was a very famous team because it was the polio team. That they were not allowed. There's books that have been written about it, which is awesome. And Tallahassee was considered a polio town, even though no one had polio. So they were supposed to be state champions. It's a great story.
Well, what is a polio town? They were banned?
Yeah, they were banned. They couldn't go anywhere outside of Tallahassee and play any teams. So my dad was in his 20s, and he and some of the sheriffs and police in town kind of rigged it, and they would, in the dark of night, drive to Pensacola and play in Pensacola and Jacksonville and all these other towns illegally. And all the teams would put their spotlights in their cars to light up the field, the Culpeppers, the Osleys. There were a lot of people that are still around Tallahassee that were on that team.
Like unsanctioned high school games.
Unsanctioned, but quiet because they could be arrested.
Yeah.
But
the boys
our
wanted to
police
play.
force was part of it, which was awesome because
Yeah.
their kids were probably all on the football team. But they would put their lights on the fields and play the games, and they won every game, but they could never tell anybody that they won all these games. So it was really cool. The guys came back and celebrated him more than 50 years later, and every single man or boy that played for him came back except the two that had died.
Wow.
It was unbelievable, and just said he taught us everything we needed to know. So anyway, my dad was from Missouri. Can I back up for a minute and
Sure.
tell you how they met?
Yeah.
Because it's an awesome story.
Yeah.
So my mom went to Leon High School. She was a cheerleader. She was awesome. But then she went to Columbia as this little tiny 5-foot Southern girl and got her master's at Columbia. They told you if you went to Las Vegas, you could make like triple of what a teacher was making anywhere else because she really wanted to teach PE. And she was like, okay, I'll go do whatever you want. So my dad was a Marine. He had gone to Missouri and played football and baseball in Missouri. He was a great athlete. And then when he graduated, he was told the same thing. They're the same age, same date, same year, exact same thing. And so he went out to Las Vegas because he could make a lot more money, right? So here's this handsome PE coach. Here's this beautiful PE teacher. And the students would kind of arrange for them to meet and say, Coach Englert needs you at the baseball field and Coach Summit needs you here. And the children all kind of rigged it. And so it's a great kind of love story on how they met at teaching in Las Vegas. So anyway, and I know I'm skipping around, but
That's
love
okay.
that.
That's worth going back for.
I know.
For sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
So he ended up, they wanted, when they started having kids, to be in Tallahassee, Florida. I think Tallahassee is what I'll call a boomerang town. Everybody leaves and everybody comes back when their family starts to be built.
Right.
My family, all my brothers and sisters all left town, and when they started having kids, they came back to Tallahassee, Florida. We did the same thing. So anyway, so I know that was a lot more than you wanted, but I get so excited about it.
No, that's an awesome story. All right, let's talk about your immediate family kind of growing up. What was that family? You mentioned it, but your family unit growing up, what was life like? And we're going to get into all the gymnastics, and I know your life changed drastically at 15. But before that, just kind of what was family life like for you? Oh, my gosh, it was awesome. So, of course, I had 2 working parents. And we would spend, I couldn't wait for the summers because we would spend every summer sweating to death at Winthrop Park because Parks and Recreation had that great program where it was free. They may still have it. And you could go to Winthrop Park or any of the other parks and stay all day long. We would start at 8 and my dad would pick us up at 5:15. And we would play box hockey. We could go on the tennis courts and somebody one day would teach tennis. Somebody would come and drop by. It was like a roving gymnastics teacher. So what is box hockey?
I don't remember, but I have a lot of press clippings that my mom kept that I always won box hockey. And you just stood there and you were in a box that they handmade, almost like a sand pit, and you just whacked each other with the with the clubs until somebody was so bloody they quit. I don't know. But some of the people that I hung out with all summer long are still good friends of mine, from Winthrop Park. But my brother Roger Englert ran the Civic Center for 45 years.
Right.
So he knows everybody in town, and he played football at Leon. My brother Mitch Englert started at Capital City Bank Group at 18 or 19 for Godfrey Smith and retired at Capital City Bank Group, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And my little sister Alice, now she left town a little bit longer than everybody else, but in her late 20s, she moved back to Tallahassee and worked for us. So it's just a super tight-knit, we're very sports-oriented. I grew up literally begging my dad to please let me go out and shag the balls for my two older brothers. So I would shag the balls for 3 hours. I'd run all over the field, throw it back in, and then the two of them had to watch me bat, and I probably got 3 pitches. And we'd play basketball, and I'd go chase the balls, and then my dad would make them watch me shoot baskets, and I was a really good basketball player, even though I was tiny.
Right.
So we kind of had the DNA of sports always in my life. In fact, if you go down to Cascades now, and I didn't know this till like last year, there is a plaque there with the semi-pro team, the Capitals, that came to Tallahassee. My grandfather brought them to Tallahassee, put them and he's in the photo. And I took a photo and showed it to my mom. She's like, well, your grandfather's in there. And I didn't even notice it was him. He only had one arm because his brother shot his arm off.
Oh, wow.
So he loved baseball. And even though he could no longer play, he played even with one arm. He's the one that was instrumental of building Centennial Field and having a semi-pro team in Tallahassee.
Which, of course, now is Cascades Park.
Exactly.
It's been reclaimed and now is a wonderful spot. But was originally, most of it was a baseball field.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was my grandfather.
That's awesome. All right. So let's talk about how you've mentioned about how sports was just integrated into your family, but somewhere along the line you got introduced to Tumbling Tots, the Tumbling Tots program.
Yes.
Right. So how did you have you said you did some gymnastics even at Winthrop Park, right?
Well,
Was that
we
your
tumbled.
introduction?
We tumbled.
All right. So you were just rolling around in the grass.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Literally. So there was and I know where her house is, near my mom's, there was a ballet teacher, the big ballet place, was Mildred Fleming.
Right.
And it was downtown, because I guess everything was downtown, quite honestly. So I went to Mildred Fleming Ballet. I hated it so bad. I was a child, and I just felt like you just did the same thing, throw the leaves down, pick up the leaves, throw the leaves down. That's what I remember. But on Fridays, they would bring in this ratty old gray and unroll it tumbling mat, and you got to do forward rolls and flip over. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so much more fun than standing in first and second and third position. Please. And so there was my mom switched me to Tallahassee Tumbling Tots. We were at the old Armory on Monroe Street. Yeah. So we were on a hardwood floor that was a skating rink at night, So that's where I started. Okay. And I can remember walking in the gym and thinking, this is the coolest thing. Forget gymnastics. It was only tumbling and trampoline. I'd had never heard of gymnastics. And you had one long mat, and there was a girl named Melanie Wilson, and she ended up marrying Keith Walker. And she was amazing, and she was only a year or two older than me, and she could tumble from one end of the mat to the other. And there was a woman named June Gifford, and Randy Truesdell was kind of behind everything. Right. And there was a man named Hartley Price at FSU that really got the tumbling tots started, because the men's gymnastics was good at Florida State before I was even born, and then it kind of went away. So the tumbling tots was just tumbling and trampoline. So somebody from Sharon Knadel and Gail Sonograth, she was actually Olympian, were going to Florida State. And they weren't competing. It was long over. So they started teaching at the tumbling tots, and there was there's a thing called gymnastics. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we had no idea who they were. Now, keep in mind, the Tumbling Tots had done this thing called Ted Mack Amateur Hour that was nationwide. And they had gotten to go on it and tumble. So I walked in, and these people,
so when you say
my
tumble,
heroes.
It's like somersaults, cartwheels.
Flip-flop, 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 flip-flop. That's what that was. Yeah, that's all we did. Okay. And they did kind of some circus-y stuff, too, like hand-to-hand, like handstands on each other.
Stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So gymnastics kind of started while I was there. And a funny story, one of the, we didn't have any money at the recreation department, so we didn't have a real balance beam. Well, we had never seen a balance beam, so one of the fathers read how to make a balance beam, and he was a carpenter, and he made the balance beam. The first time we went to a meet, the top of the beam is less wide than a CD, an old CD. It's less It's smaller than the width of a CD,
Right.
which is insane.
Yeah.
But the depth is deeper. So he made it, and we had practiced on the wrong side of the balance beam.
The
wide side of the balance beam. So when we got to this meet for the first time, we were like, these people don't know what they're doing. They're on the wrong side of the balance beam. And of course, we were awful because we were on the wrong side of the balance. We trained in the wrong side. But we were literally reading how to do gymnastics. So it said on the bars, stick your hands underneath the bar, curl your fingers, put your left foot forward, take your right foot and kick it over the bar. Like, we had never seen it. We had no videos.
Right.
That's how we started.
Wow.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
So eventually they started buying some of the apparatus and it started growing from there?
Correct.
Okay.
And we were still at the Armory. And thank God there was a woman. And then we moved at some point. I don't know all the numbers, but we moved to the Northwood Mall, the old Northwood Mall.
Right.
And you'd
Where the
go down the
library was and
escalator.
all
Well,
that.
we would go down the escalator and we were in the basement.
Yeah.
Because nothing else could. They were like, perfect, we'll take the basement. And it was a big gym for Parks and Recreation. There was only one problem. There was a column in the middle of the Florex mat. Not in the middle, kind of to the side. So you had to schedule where your runs were to do your tumbling. So you didn't hit the column while you were upside down.
I can see why that would be a problem.
Yeah, it was quite famous that you had to do that. But I was very lucky because this magnificent girl, she was a young girl, she was 18, named Andy Anderson, went to Florida State. And she walked in the gym one day because to make money, like so many of our coaches were just Florida State students. And she was like, I don't know if she looked at me and said, you could be really good, but she said, I think you've got something. And she had actually seen gymnastics because she was from up north, where they actually were doing gymnastics.
But she saw something in you.
She saw something in me. And skipping ahead, she ends up marrying Curtis Long, which is in the Long track family. The track
Mike
at FSU
Long,
is, Mike and Terry, and he was also a track guy. And we did gymnastics with everybody else, Melanie Wilson. I can remember when Ron Gallimore walked in, and he was didn't have a clue either, but he could bounce higher than the ceiling when he didn't even know what he was doing. It was a great time. And Ann Kalani, Christy Crenshaw, but she said, I think you need more time, because we had one balance beam. So you had 300 kids training, and I was getting a little better, and you just had to kind of wait your turn.
Yeah.
And so she convinced Florida State to let me go out to Tully Gym, where they had old equipment left over from when they did gymnastics.
Okay.
And we would pull it out, and she and I would train at Tully Gym.
Wow.
I know. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But she was only 5 years older than me, and she basically dedicated every minute of her free time helping train me individually. And then she's the one that knew this guy named Dick Mulvihill that was like Olympian maker, and he had just moved to Oregon, and she arranged a phone call with him and I. And I was like 15, and it was like do all end all if I would move to Eugene, Oregon and get to train with him. And he just said, hey, Carrie, had a wild northern accent. And I was like, yes, sir. And he laughs when I say yes, sir.
People from up north really don't know what to do with that.
I know.
Yeah.
And he said, let me ask you, I'm going to ask you one question. And I thought, oh my gosh, yes, sir. And he said, what size is your mom's foot? Honest to goodness. And I thought, okay, that was the last thing I prepared for. Like, was I dedicated? Did I, And I said,
Shoe
she
size.
wears like a 4.5, which was, I guess, the magical thing that he wanted to hear, meaning she was tiny.
He wants to make sure you don't grow up to be 6 feet tall.
Right. Well, but then he asked how tall my dad was, and I was like 6'2", and then he laughed, and I said, he goes, well, let's hope you'll stay on your mom's side or something like that. And that was it. So I end up flying out to Eugene, Oregon.
So what was your,
it was crazy.
Yeah, right. So the question is, when you're thinking about going to Oregon and, you're having the conversation with the coach and kind of what is your goal at that point? Do you have any idea of what the future may hold, or does it just sound fun, or what's going through your head?
I will tell you honestly, at 14, 15, probably not that much. I just had a coach this young girl, again, an FSU student, that really believed in me. And she just kept saying, I've seen everybody in the nation because I'm up north where we hold all the meets, and you could really be good. And I had won the Florida AAU which probably wasn't much of anything, and went to the nationals and did really great. I think I won. I don't even remember the nationals. And she was like, again, that's not a super elite level, but she believed in me. She knew of this coach, Dick Mulvihill, and Linda Matheny, a 3-time Olympian that was his wife. And she said, you can do this. And my parents were like, do you want to pursue this? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And I'd seen Olga Korbut in 1972, and that was really the first real gymnastics I had ever seen in my whole life. And I would just do handstands every day, all that day long, and cartwheels. And my mom said I never sat down and ate. And so I knew I loved it. And I thought, all these people kind of believe I can do this. Why not? It's a great adventure. I'm going to try this. Let's go.
Yeah. So were you scared at all? Because you're not just going out for training, right? Let me ask you this. Did you know at that time you were going to be out there for that long? Did you know what the commitment was you were making?
I knew what the commitment was, but I probably didn't think as deeply as most people would think you would as a young girl.
Yeah.
I mean, I moved out there, but it was expensive. And my parents were both teachers. My dad was a principal at Kate Sullivan for years and then the superintendent of elementary schools. But we didn't have like ridiculous money, and flying all the way to 3,000 miles away was too much. So I had never met the coach. They had never met the coach. We had never seen the gym. I didn't know where I was going to be living. He said, don't worry, I have it taken care of. And I got on a plane and left by myself and headed out there. And that's what I did. And I got to come home 2 times in 3 years because I worked out 8 to 10 hours a day. I got to come home and graduate, which is a whole nother story, miracle in itself.
We'll get into Leon and all that in a minute.
And we just worked really hard, and I loved it. I loved every single thing about it.
So from the beginning, those first weeks, those first months, you just embraced it and jumped in from the very beginning. There was no like, what am I doing out here?
No.
None of that.
No, except I will tell you, I walked in the gym the first day, and it's not a popular way to coach now, but the coach was screaming, had the main 5 girls lined up and was in their face and screaming and yelling and telling them they were fat and they were sloppy and they didn't work hard and he was going to send them home. And that's the first thing I walked into the gym, and he looked at me and says, why aren't you ready to work out? After I'd flown from Florida out to Oregon for the first time in my life. So they'd loaned me a leotard, and he said, let's get started. And it didn't scare me. I mean, it didn't. And again, that's not a popular way to coach now, but it really didn't bother me. And he was a yeller, screamer, in-your-face, bad guy. He was not well liked at all in the gymnastics community, but he built champions, and that's what I wanted.
Okay. So let's look at your life overall. So you've got training 8 to 10 hours a day. You've got to do some kind of school, right? You can't just pretend like school doesn't exist.
Right.
So, and I know you graduated from Leon High, so there's got to be a story in there somehow. How did that work out?
There's a story in there in that I did go to the school in Eugene, Oregon for 2 weeks. The first day I got sent in the hall because the teacher, I said yes, ma'am, to her 3 times, and she sent me in the hallway and said, I will not take smart mouth from one of these gymnasts that just fly in temporarily. And the whole time the principal was lecturing me, I kept saying, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. And they were all, remember, Eugene was very, very, very hippie. Like all the hippies had moved up from California, Eugene, Oregon. They did not like me at all. Anyway, and by the second week, the coach said, I've figured out how many hours we need over the next 3 years, and you cannot get good enough and peak in time for the Olympics with only 5 to 6 hours a day of training. You need to quit school. I'm calling your mom and dad. Well, they're educators, and they all have their masters in education, and they love education, and as do I. And they said, okay. I couldn't believe it. I didn't have a tutor. I literally did not go to school my junior and senior year of high school. So thank you to, and they were both deceased, which I hate but I've told them thank you many times, Mr. Conley and Mr. Nettles, I don't even know that I know their first names, were the principal and the vice principal at Leon. And between them and my dad, apparently I had a report card I never saw once a quarter or once a semester or whatever. And if I went to Japan to do gymnastics or Russia or China or whatever, they were giving me like music credits, history credits, English credits, all of this. And everyone was in shock when that was one of the 2 times I got to come home. I got to fly home and graduate from Leon High School in 1975. And everybody's like, we haven't seen you in 2 years. And I was just like, just don't say anything. And I guess they can take my diploma away now. I don't know.
The statute of limitations is probably passed
exactly.
on that.
But thank God for all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they believed in me and they understood the education that I was getting. I mean, we were being trained by the U.S. Department of, I don't know what, the Secretary of State on how to say and how to act everywhere we went out of the country. And I was getting experiences with Mao Zedong and people that, can you imagine? Was I going to learn that at Leon High School? So it really took a lot of forward thinking in the early 70s for people to believe in me and help me do this.
Yeah. I want to ask you one more question about the training. You got off to a late start.
Yes.
In comparison.
Very late.
You grew up in a place where gymnastics didn't even exist.
Correct.
But you get out to Oregon and you're up against people who have probably been groomed for this since the time they were 2 or 3 years old.
Correct.
How did that impact your psyche or your thoughts on this? Or did you seem like you probably just jumped in and said, I can ride with these people, I'm going.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I can remember Dick Mulvihill saying after the second week, he goes, okay, I'm going to unteach you everything you've learned. And I was just like, okay. I mean, if being honest, I don't think it was like, I'll do anything. It was not like that. I just thought it was meant to be. And I was having fun. My thighs would be bleeding when I would get home because on the bars back then, the bars were set up that, you would rip your skin on your thighs. My hands would be bleeding. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved it. And you literally were so sore and hurt so bad every day, you didn't know how you were going to get started again. And I kind of embraced that. It was a passion of mine, and that's probably like sicko behavior. I don't know. And I never really even thought about it. I thought, this is what it takes. I get it. This is what it takes.
Right. Okay. Well, that's great. Well, all the hard work paid off, and you made the 1976 Olympic team.
Yes.
For the Summer Games in Montreal. Talk about that experience.
It was awesome. I literally it's hard for me to talk about. I think as I've gotten older, I kind of understand the impact more. Mm-hmm. Maybe I didn't then. And to represent your country. There's a Netflix show right now that just came out called Court of Gold, and it's all about the Final Four in Paris just a few months ago. And it's talking to all the U.S. basketball players as well as the other 3 finalists talking about what it means to represent your country. And it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. So, walking into a stadium, and at first I thought, oh my gosh, I made the Olympic team. It's in Montreal.
Yeah. Not the most exotic place to be.
Why couldn't it be someplace amazing?
Yeah.
And as it turned out, it was awesome because it was so close to the United States. It had a lot of Americans.
Yeah.
So when they say Estaciuni and you walk in and you can't see inside the arena at all. You are down in kind of a basement and outside, and you come up and that's all you hear. And people are chanting USA. It's a pretty incredible feeling.
Yeah.
So
I've had on a previous podcast episode, I had Micelle Green on, who was in the Olympics in Atlanta,
right,
as a sprinter, and she said to this day, every time she hears the national anthem, she tears up.
I do, I totally do, and there is no greater privilege. I don't think it's different, and everybody in your country is pulling for you, not just your team. And that's a different thing. And you don't want to let them down. So It's amazing.
So you're still involved with the U.S. Olympic movement and serve in leadership. And so what is your role there and why is that important to you still?
Well, I sit on the board of the U.S. Olympics and Paralympians Association. So it is who oversees all the Olympians and Paralympians. So it's not the Olympic Committee, but it's right under them. And it's to make sure that whether you're an Olympian 50 years ago, 70 years ago, or 2 years ago, you understand once you're Olympian, you're always an Olympian.
So sort of the Alumni Association of Olympians.
Correct, but it's too elite to say alumni. So
that's right. We won't use that word.
But no, like we purposefully don't use that word. And it's funny, I thanked a Marine coming back from Antarctica a couple of weeks ago. And I said, you were a Marine. He had a shirt on. He said, no, I am a Marine. Yeah. And I said, I know that. Once a Marine, always a Marine. I said, we got into that whole conversation. Right.
So same with Olympians.
Yes.
You're always an Olympian.
Right. You're never a former Olympian.
Right. That's pretty cool. All right. So when your Olympic experience was over as a competitor, you decided to go to college, right?
Yes.
I'm still not sure how you got into college given your high school situation.
I know.
I know about that.
I don't either. I've never figured that out.
But you did get into University of Georgia.
No, I actually, hold
you went
on,
somewhere else first,
because it's very
right?
important.
Okay, yeah.
I went to a tiny school called Clarion University.
Right, I did see that. Yep.
They had Title IX had just started. Well, Clarion and Donna Deverona, that was a big swimmer and helped push through the whole thing, is a good friend of mine now.
Right. And Title IX means equal, well, I don't know how you, not equal treatment, but for women's
more sports for women in
sports.
college.
Right.
It's never going to be equal, but and unfortunately, a lot of people looked at it negatively, like we lost our wrestling,
but
so women could have
schools
gymnastics.
to spend more money on women's sports.
Correct. So I think because that had really just started a few years before, this little tiny place in Clarion, Pennsylvania was so smart. They decided they would put all their stuff into gymnastics. So they basically owned the best gymnast. So like we won national champions and all this
so
before
you did
everybody else
compete in college
for
there.
1 year.
Okay.
I hated it. I was used to like performing. This is ego, like in front of 20, 30,000 people live and then all over the world. And now suddenly there's like 2,000 people staring at you. And it just wasn't that fun.
Right.
And it wasn't that good. I mean, college gymnastics is not at the level of the Olympics. And I was like, I didn't have a goal. I had achieved my goal and I didn't have another goal. So I did it for a year, but that's where I met Curtis. So he was from New Jersey swimming there. I was doing gymnastics there.
Okay.
So just like my mom and dad that were from two different worlds, but something brought them to Las Vegas from Missouri and Tennessee. He's from New Jersey, which I tell him not to tell anybody. And I was from Tallahassee, Florida, and we met at Clarion. So
that's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And then I really didn't want to do gymnastics, but I felt like it would be rude of me after my parents spent all this money helping me to not take a scholarship. So I got offered a scholarship and a lot of money under the table to coach, like assistant coach. I couldn't be a head coach because I hadn't graduated yet.
Right. So what led to the decision to transfer from there to UGA?
It was just because I didn't want to compete anymore. And they said, hey, we'll help you coach. And the head coach was the girl, Andy, who was then Andy Long. She was the head coach at University of Georgia.
The one who had helped you in Tully.
Yes.
Okay.
So she said, how about we work together? And
Awesome.
So I was able to honor my parents by having everything taken care of and paid for and, help her out in return and basically go to college for free. So it worked out perfectly.
So we'll get into yours and Curtis's history in your future together from this point in the story. But did he come with you to Georgia or? I was a year and a half behind in college because of the Olympics. But Curtis finished up at Clarion. We got married as soon as he finished graduating. So we were married my last year or so while I was at University of Georgia. He lived there and drove to Atlanta to work every day. So we lived in married housing. It was $114 if you got the furniture a month. So we go back there anytime we're in Athens and we see our little place where we started and we love it, so. That's awesome. So at Georgia, you studied PR and journalism.
Yes.
Right. So what led you to those majors or pursuing that?
Again, now that I think about it, because I'm not dumb, I just listen to what people say. And if they believe in me, I believe it. So just like you can go out and be an Olympian if you go to Oregon, and I didn't think that much about it. There was a man that was married to the woman. I won't even say his name because everybody would know who he is. And he said, you should be in PR when I got to Clarion. And I said, okay, I don't even know what that means, but he said you would be perfect for it. No idea what it was. And I never looked back after that. He just said, I'm telling you, you are meant for this. So again, I tend to believe people, I guess, that are passionate, and he was right. I like to think so.
Well, I'm glad you've had people in your life that pointed you in the right direction,
Correct.
right? Because who knows what you'd be doing if you believed somebody else.
I know. I believe the right people, obviously.
And we'll be right back. How I Got Here is sponsored by Barano Heating and Air Conditioning in Tallahassee. I've been friends with Patrick Barano since we met in a chamber leads group about 15 years ago. I'll admit that I pursued him pretty hard to be his marketing firm and eventually won him over. And the reason I wanted to work with him is that I was already a customer and I knew what kind of company he and his father before him had built. He cares about his customers, he cares about his team, and he cares about this community. I've experienced Barano Heating and Air when they installed a complete system replacement a few years ago, and I enjoy peace of mind and same-day service with my Total Comfort Service Agreement. I've also been behind the scenes at their office and seen firsthand the true character of this company, and that's why we're so proud to represent them. To learn more or to schedule an appointment online anytime, visit baranoac.com. They really always will be there for you. And now back to the show. You finish up at University of Georgia, you and Curtis get married, and then you get a job in Atlanta. Was it
Yes.
with him or somewhere else?
Because he was already working in Atlanta.
Right.
We didn't give much thought to it. We said, well, work in Atlanta. Again, kind of just followed what was there. And we worked. I started from day one. I've never had a resume. Never had a resume. So I hadn't got
or a
my
high school diploma.
Or a high school diploma. So I got an interview with this company called Pringle Dixon Pringle, and it was a husband and a wife and a friend. And the man did advertising, she did PR, kind of like what we ended up doing.
Right.
And the man in the middle was kind of like the researcher and Joby Dixon. And she and I hit it off the minute I walked in her office. And I said, I haven't really gotten my resume done. And she said, it doesn't matter. Can you start tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And they end up hiring Curtis a couple of years later. So the four of us are still super good friends today because they really got us started. And it was a hard decision 7 or so years later when we said we're going to leave because they were really wanting us to sign papers to take over their company when they retired, even though we were in our 20s. But we had 2 young kids, Clayton and Cole, our 2 first boys out of 3. I had them at 25 and 20. We had them at 25 and 27. And there was just something empty. Our lives were full. I was handling Coca-Cola worldwide and Ford Motor Company and going to the LA Olympics for Coca-Cola and staying 3 weeks. And even though I had 2 babies, and I was just like, family's so important. And I hadn't lived around my family since I moved to Eugene, Oregon. I just hadn't been home for almost 15 years, 14, 13 years. And we sat there one night and just said, it's a hard decision, but we need to be around family. And he grew up in a very small town in New Jersey and had his family around. So we said, we're just going to start something of our own in Tallahassee, Florida, because there's nothing else we could do. We didn't want to work for government. And we feared if we, worked for the bagel shop or something like that and did their advertising and PR, it would be okay because that had to come second to family. And that's how we ended up moving back to Tallahassee with no clients, no future, didn't have a clue what we were going to do.
So you didn't bring anybody with you. You literally started from zero.
That was a big deal when we were leaving, that people would steal things in the middle of the night like madmen, and they would take all the clients. Yeah. And we had huge client relations. But that's so unethical to me. And I didn't want that, nor did my husband, to be the legacy of our company that we stole clients from our good friends to start our own company. So we literally started at Village Commons or whatever it's called off of Capitol Circle. We had a little basement place. They hadn't finished building it yet. So we had boards that we walked through. And Curtis, it's so funny, we opened the agency in March. We started the agency in 1987. And he got on a tie and suit. Back then you got all dressed up. Right. And I put on like a pair of jeans and a T-shirt. And I was like, what are you doing? And he goes, you know what? In case someone walks in, I want to look the role.
Right.
And I said, okay, I don't think anybody's going to walk in because the parking lot's not finished. We're walking through the mud to get into our little basement area. But I believe you. But, we just believed it could happen.
Right. So as you started the agency and started to grow, did you ever doubt if you could serve clients worldwide from Tallahassee before digital connection and everything that we take for granted now?
Correct.
You didn't have that before.
No.
It was all in person or telephone
exactly.
and stuff. So did you have all the confidence that you could do that from Tallahassee?
Well, I'll tell you a real quick story. So within 6 months of starting the agency with no clients, we had, because I had done a lot of work with Marriott out of Washington, D.C., we had gotten a call from Marriott, and they said, are you close to Jacksonville, Florida? And I was like, of course. And she said, can you be in a meeting in 3 hours? And I'm like, yes, not a problem. And I drive 1,000,000 miles an hour and go to this meeting. I won't tell you what it was for. And she said, what do you think? I said, I think the firm that they're using is terrible. And they were about to open Marriott at Sawgrass, their first ground-up resort ever. They only had one other resort. Let us do it. Within 2 years, we had all the Marriott business worldwide.
Wow.
Domino's Pizza, we're selling our house in Atlanta, and we go up there after we started the agency 6 months later because we kept it for a little while in case we needed to move back.
Smart.
Just in
have
case.
Plan B.
Yeah, we were like, just in case this is really bad, we still have the house. And we go up and we see a guy riding on, his name's Dave, and we see a guy, Mike, and we see a guy riding on his bike, and he's like, hey, where have y'all been? And we were like, well, we started our own thing, and he's like, come see me in Ann Arbor with Domino's Pizza, which is their headquarters, and we were like, he's kind of a party guy, and we were like, we don't have money to just fly around. I mean, we don't. He kept saying, for 6 months, we told him no. Finally, he said, please come up here. I will pay your plane flights. And we were like, okay. We walk into a meeting with Tom Monahan, the CEO of Domino's Pizza and the owners of the baseball team and Detroit and everything else. And we're like, Mike, what's the deal? He goes, well, I'm third in command. Why didn't you just ask me? I'm kind of important up here. And we were like, are you serious? So we started writing speeches and doing stuff, which we didn't even do. I'd never written a speech in my life, but suddenly I was a speechwriter and did all their franchisee interactions. And we picked up Diners Club. So within the first year and a half, we had 3 huge, not their regional, not their state, the agency of record clients. So even though we were working on fax machines that took like the 8-minute rolled paper, people don't even understand now. We didn't have computers. We were typing up letters. We didn't have our sights on being global, but we knew we didn't want to just do Tallahassee. We didn't want to just do the state of Florida. We knew our experience was better than that. Not any offense, but just we knew we couldn't grow if we limited ourselves.
Right.
So we only took full-time 12-month retainer clients, which cut out a lot of other people. And we've stuck to that 100% today. And that kind of kept us with people that were really serious about their marketing. If they would sign and commit to the amount for 12 months, then we could really build something from that. So we had no idea. And to have 36 clients in 36 countries is amazing. I mean, it really is.
That's great. So what was it like working with Curtis from the beginning and, relatively new husband and wife, starting a business, moving back home, I mean, after a few years, and also figuring out the duties of the splitting up the agency and figuring out who's going to do what and all those dynamics. What were those like?
Well, first, I'm the luckiest girl in the world because we've been married 45 and a half. When it gets over that, every month counts.
Counting, right?
And we haven't killed each other, which is pretty miraculous.
Yeah.
Raising 3 sons and building multiple houses and building a big business. But it's just, we're great together. We're very different people. And I think that's important because if you were the same person, you would just be doing alike things. We're both very smart. He's more analytical to me. Everybody says he's boring. He's not boring. He's just boring if we're sitting together. He is not boring at all. He's awesome. But then, poor thing, if we do interviews together, then they're like, oh, so you're kind of the straight man. And I'm like, no, he's not, if I'm not in the equation. But he was clearly more on the advertising side. I was clearly more on the PR side. So those two things are very different components of marketing. Totally different. You buy one, you earn one.
Right.
One's paid, one's not. The clarity of that was very, very clear. So if it was a potential client that we were pitching that was more on the PR side, I took the lead. If it was more on the advertising, he took the lead. We shared the medial down the middle duties, whether it was research or anything else, really on whose background was the best and what the chemistry of the client would be. That's really important. Chemistry is everything. And so you kind of would psychologically understand who the person was. And if it was, I hate to say it, a man and he loved sports and he loved the so-and-so, I knew, they were going to aggregate toward Curtis a little better that way. Mm-hmm. You kind of divided and conquered without thinking about it. Did we have knockdown, drag-out fights all the time? Probably. But at the end of the day, the respect that we have for each other and the passion for what we do, sometimes it might take a month, sometimes it might take an hour. But at the end of the day, you would kind of figure out, and it made whatever it was better. It always made it better. It didn't make it worse. Whether it was the concept for a client or something at home, we survived it, and it actually made it a lot better.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know that you are recently retired from active duty.
Yes.
Right? But tell us about the agency today. Just a quick umbrella overview of what is the Zimmerman Agency. And I know that, and I even get a little confused about the names. And I know you sold it. And so just kind of a quick overview of all that stuff.
I will give you a quick overview. Yeah. The Zimmerman Agency is the name. We sold to Omnicom, which is the largest in the world, largest marketing firm in the world, when we were still in our 40s. So 5 years after that, we could have been done. But we love what we do, and we have as many as 164 employees sometimes. We try to stay around 130, but, when we get more business than we probably need sometimes, it sticks around 164. So we've had over 2,000 employees. We're really proud of that. We're talking about full-time salaried employees. So today we just kept doing it because we loved it, even though we could have retired. Cade, our youngest, was still in middle school. And so it wasn't like we could go off and go to Europe for 3 months or something.
Right.
And we love all our people and we love our clients. So the agency is very digital first, because everything is now. We started doing digital, we started doing video and everything long before everybody else caught on. We had websites for clients before people could get on them. Like we just try to always stay in advance of everything else. It's very much changed in PR because we're engaging podcasters, we're engaging influencers. I mean, we've been doing that for probably 10 years.
Right.
But, the old world media is changing drastically. So just like the evolution of having fax machines to, everything else, I used to love that you could lie to the client and say, I can't get it to you for 3 days because that's how long FedEx will take. And now it's like you have a tenth of a second and you don't have any cushion at all.
Nobody to throw under the bus.
Right.
Yeah.
But, Curtis will retire before you know it. And we have great leadership. We have been so fortunate, just like I said, Tallahassee's kind of boomerang town in that people leave, but when they're ready to start families, they come back around. We have 20, 30 people that are boomerang employees that were like, I need to go to New York to get more experience. I'm going to LA. And they all come back. They all come back because they're just like, I'm working on bigger accounts worldwide. I'm in Dubai. I'm doing stuff in Russia. I'm doing stuff in China. And they weren't doing that in New York. So, so it's thrilling. And so we've got people that have worked with us for 10, 20, 30 years that are amazing. And they will continue to take the Zimmerman Agency forward.
Is anybody surprised anymore on your worldwide clients when you tell them you're in Tallahassee, Florida?
Well, I will tell you the first 100% of the time in a Q&A, which is typical after a big pitch, right? And it could be the Q&A, and they always lead with, why in the world should I trust and hire a firm in Tallahassee, Florida? Every other agency is 100% of the time out of New York, period. That's the only people we compete with. And I know it very well. I sound convincing every time. And I say, look, first off, the people that are on Madison Avenue aren't from Madison Avenue. They didn't grow up on Madison Avenue.
Right.
They're from all over. Most likely people that could be handling your business used to work for us. But we have to be 10 times better than everybody else because we're in Tallahassee, Florida. And why does American Airlines, Aflac, Hard Rock, PGA Tour, why do all these people hire us to handle them worldwide if we're not awesome at what we do? Quick story. When American Airlines hired us, Tony Radka, I had been trying to get the account for a year. And finally, the day of our Christmas party, he says, I'm flying into town. I'm like, oh my gosh, because the Christmas party is a really big deal.
Yeah.
He's going to ruin it. So we came up with strategy A, strategy B, strategy C, because we didn't know what he was going to, and people knew which ones. If I just put B, they knew who to come in. C, they knew who to come in. He said, no, I don't need to meet with anybody but you and Curtis. He said, I really just we gave him a tour, which we always do, because it's just see all the amazing people and our complex and our courtyard. And he said, okay, get me a contract. And I did not have that prepared. That was the only thing we didn't have.
Yeah.
And I said, well, Tony, what? He said, I just wanted to make sure y'all were real. He said, and I had to tell my boss in Dallas, Texas, why I was having to buy a Delta ticket because American Airlines doesn't fly into Tallahassee, Florida, and I want to hire them to do our nationwide work, and which is a great story.
Yeah.
And then he gave us 10 tickets to give away at the Christmas party anywhere in the world that American Airlines flew. So he was already a really popular client by the time we got done. But nobody would believe us. But then they would look at the client list and they would say, but how did all these other people believe in you if you're not great at what you do?
Yeah.
And guess what? They come to Tallahassee because of the lifestyle. So I want someone that's happy in their life as well as happy at work.
Yeah.
So we know our sweet spot is hiring people that have a couple of children already, that are looking for great schools and great parks and a great environment because they'll stay forever if they're happy where they live. We always say work globally, live locally. That's what we tell every single person. You get to work globally and work on amazing things, but you get to be in time for your kids' soccer practice and don't miss their baseball games because you're 10 minutes away from everything in Tallahassee, basically.
For sure. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, we talked about it a little bit before. You are retired now, and obviously life isn't slowing down too much, but one of your roles in the recent years is you're a grandmother now.
Yes.
So how does that role rank in your list of things that you've done over the years? How much are you enjoying that?
Well, I will tell you, first off, family has always been everything to us. And I want to make clear, Curtis was a current dad 42 years ago. He changed diapers. I was traveling all the time. He was traveling all the time. He was the guy who did all of that. So our family hasn't changed, but it's not just our grandkids, of which we have 5 from 18 to a 4-month-old, 18 years to a 4-month-old, which is awesome. But I've also got my mom who's about to turn 100, so we're interacting. And she lives alone at home in the house I grew up in, which is insane. She'll outlive all of us, I kind of feel like. And my sister Alice has Parkinson's, even though she's very young and has had it for 20 years. So being able to be more involved with them has really been a blessing. And doing a lot more with the grandchildren has truly been a less blessing. And we were at baseball last night and danced the day before and gymnastics just like my parents were. And so we're living through them the same way our parents got to do with us. And that's just so important. And a friend, Martin Shipman, I will give him credit, who had been the CEO at TOC, and is a good friend of mine. He had said a few years ago, he said, Carrie, you've won every award in the world that you can win. You've won professional, personal. You've achieved all this stuff. You've got money. You made money. You don't have to worry about that. Why are you still working so hard? And I told him the great story about we love what we do and we're passionate. And he said, would you ever have any regrets? And I said, there's always some regrets, but they made you who you are. And he said, no, but I mean, like really regrets. He knew what he was trying to tell me, but he wanted me to come up with it myself, I think. And he said, well, what about family? And I said, well, our 3 boys, we never missed anything. Sometimes we were taking private jets, doing whatever we could not to miss anything. And he goes, but what about now? And I really went home and thought about it for about 5 months. And that's what stimulated me just on the spot saying I'm retiring, is that I don't want to look back and say, I didn't spend enough time with my mom. I didn't spend enough time with my sister. We didn't spend enough time with the grandkids when they were still really young. And that has been just a wonderful experience to remember that even though I'm so passionate about work and I love it, and I spend so much of my time now just giving out free advice to everybody that calls and asks for it, because I want them to have just a great experience. It's living the family dream has always been what it was all about. So I'm right back there again.
That's awesome. Yeah, when you think about you made that decision all the way back from moving to Atlanta, from Atlanta back to Tallahassee. Yeah. And that's proven to be the foundational decision of your whole life from that point on.
38 years later.
Yeah.
That has always been, and I'd like to look back and think that our 3 boys, Clayne and Cole and Cade, always felt like they had the best childhood in the world. And that we were always there, but they still have great respect for what we were doing.
Right.
If it was the one time that we were like, we cannot get back from China in time, that they understood. And I think that's developed who they are too, because they're super successful, super hard workers. And all 3 of them have married super dynamic women, which I love, that are hardworking, that have their own lives, their own careers. And I think that came from us. And I think that also came from, I can speak to my side, my family of having hardworking and strong women. And I think they'll have great lives because they married strong women that are super career oriented.
All right, Carrie, looking back.
Oh, no.
These are the final 2 questions
here.
Oh,
no.
Sorry. So looking back, what is the one thing or person that changed or altered the trajectory of your life to this point?
I would probably say Andy Anderson, who's now Andy Long, because if she had not jumped into the gym, if she hadn't come to get, $6 or $5 an hour or whatever it was to make some money when she was 18 years old as a student at FSU, and really said, you could be great. I have seen it. I'm from Michigan or Minnesota or wherever it was. It started with an M, and I've seen real gymnastics. You could do this. I would have to say that was a dramatic change. And then after that, if I get 2, it would be Curtis. Honestly, the life we live together is so amazing. And how, again, this New Jersey boy and this Florida girl met in Pennsylvania in this little teeny tiny town in the snow. It was awful. In Pennsylvania, and fell in love. I've just been blessed. I've totally been blessed.
All right, final question. The podcast is called How I Got Here.
Yes.
And we've talked about how you got to this point in your life. Where do you think here might be for you in 3 to 5 years?
Right here. I don't have a great answer for that, in that what I'm doing now, that I've made this dramatic shift, should not change in 3 to 5 years. If I'm blessed with being healthy and all that stuff. And it's just the idea that family always comes first. And I've been able to make that shift. It was hard. I hate not working every day. But I've managed to do it, and I've been able to utilize that by helping other people that call randomly all over the country and say, I'm thinking about starting this. What do I do? So I've been able to get a balance. So I don't see 3 to 5 years. Hopefully Curtis will be retired. I don't know that I want to spend more time together. We have spent a lot of time together through our whole life. We've worked together and nurtured a family together. So I don't know how much more together we could possibly be, but hopefully it'll look a lot like that.
Thanks for listening to the show. You can subscribe at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. It really does make a difference. Thanks to my amazing staff at Fiore Communications, who pick up the slack while I'm working on these podcasts, and to Troy Bloom for composing our theme music. You can hear more of Troy's creations on Facebook and Instagram at Troy Bloom Music. To connect with the podcast or suggest a future guest, follow us on social media or email us at podcast@fiorecommunications.com.